Safe to say the MMA Beat is making up for lost time because after a 3-month hiatus, we are back with our second show in as many weeks. And my friends, we have a lot to get to this week. And by the way, thank you so much for all your kind words last week. So great to see how everyone was so excited to have the show back in their lives. And we are certainly excited to be back doing the show in our brand new studio here in the heart of Midtown Manhattan. All right, let's get to it. Same panel as last week. Luke Thomas from Sirius XM Radio and MMAfighting.com. Mike Chiappetta from MMAfighting.com as well. And from ESPN.com, ESPN the magazine, and Fight Magazine, Chuck Mindenhall.
Yeah,
Just kidding.
Yeah.
Chuck Mindenhall. There he is. I mess with him every week, saying his name the wrong way. Okay, guys, lots to get to this week. Let's start with Pat Healy, of course. It was announced, actually he announced it by himself, Tuesday night. Pat Healy said that he had tested positive for marijuana following his life-altering, career-altering win over Jim Miller at UFC 159, and he has been suspended for 90 days. But the big blow to Bam Bam Healy, Mike, is that his bonuses, 2 fight night bonuses, submission of the night, fight of the night, both taken away. We're not quite sure. And his win bonus, it's probably in the $130,000 to $150,000 mark. I mean, this is so fascinating because the UFC has come out multiple times from Mark Ratner, the VP of Regulatory Affairs, to Dana White saying that marijuana is not a PED. They did not suspend him, yet they're taking away these bonuses. Was this the right call?
I don't think so. You know, when you look back in February, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. was fined $900,000 by the Nevada State Athletic Commission for testing positive for marijuana. A huge sum of money. It was 30% of his purse. He still walked away with $2.1 million. Minus taxes, of course, which is a major amount of money. For Pat Healy, the money he was making was a life-changing sum. I mean, obviously not on the level of a top boxer, but as it turns out, that would have been more than 80% of what he earned was taken away from it. And why? For marijuana, as we said, really, it's not a performance enhancer. These safeguards, where the UFC kind of held back bonuses until after drug tests, was to safeguard against PED use. As far as I believe, that was their real intent. Where's the proof that marijuana is a performance enhancer? Even institutions like the NCAA, which polices college basketball and baseball, and for our student athletes, their medical research team unanimously agreed that marijuana is not a performance enhancer. And here we are in 2013 where an athlete is getting his money taken away. This is not to say that Pat Healy doesn't hold some responsibility. He smoked marijuana, he admitted it, he did something wrong. It is against the rules. But to me, the distinction that needs to be made is marijuana, should it be penalized the same way as something like steroids or testosterone or EPO, something that is a true performance enhancer? The fact that this is still happening in 2013 to me is mind-numbing. It's just crazy. Dana White has said things to suggest that it should not be treated this way, yet they do. Yet here they are, and they penalize him for it. Mark Ratner too, a guy who used to be a regulator, and here we are. To me, this is just, it's the height of craziness, and it needs to change. Should he have some sort of penalty? I'm fine with that. He did break a rule. Should it be the same penalty as a PED user? Hell no.
What do you think, Chuck?
Well, one of the things you pointed out in your piece, which was very good, and Jeff Wagenheim of Sports Illustrated also wrote a very good piece about this whole subject, is on the Chavez fight, Dana White had tweeted out, you know, Nevada's lost its mind. Nevada State Athletic Commission has lost its mind. In this case, it's more like the UFC has lost its conscience. You know, it's like one of those situations where they have the right to say, this is absurd. This doesn't really affect what happened in the cage that night. They don't have to take that money, especially when, you know, Brian Caraway and, you know, now lobbies for it. He gets it. There's a lot of strangeness in this whole transaction. But for me, I'm like, in a situation like that, I feel like Healy is sort of, you know, we can't establish the timeline of when he actually did this. It had no bearings on his fight that night. So the UFC could have looked at it as absurd. I mean, we've seen Dana White basically disagree with rules in the past. We saw the 12-6 elbows that disqualified John Jones. He still goes on about that. There's all kinds of situations where he basically looks at it as absurd. They could have easily done the same thing here and protected Pat Healy, who was one of the Strikeforce crossover whom he was talking about protecting or you know, feeling sorry for coming up. All these Strikeforce guys, he felt bad for them. Here's his one opportunity to do the guy a solid, and that didn't happen. So that's my contention with it.
Yeah, well,
Here we go.
He's been winding up.
Well, the thing is, listen, I've been on this program many times, and I've said this is the dumbest thing ever. There's a new dumb in town, and I have found it. It is this. What are the unified rules for? They are for basically, there are a number of things, but two things. They are one, to establish a modicum of competitiveness and a way to ensure fighter safety both proactively on behalf of one's opponent and on behalf of the fighter itself. That's what they exist for. A urinalysis, which is what these commissions use. They don't use blood tests to establish these thresholds. A urinalysis has no dose correlation between impairment and timeline. In other words, a urinalysis will never tell you, A, when they used, and B, how much they used. So we have a body of medical evidence that you pointed out that says it's not performance enhancing. We have a test that is as unscientific as it gets for purposes of establishing fairness and safety. Has nothing to do with it, and we're taking away 80% of a kid's purse. This is the height of irrationality. And people who say things like, well, he knew what he was doing, he was smoking. Yes. Obviously, if you're a professional fighter, you have to take precautions about your career. Okay, fair enough. But everyone else should be outraged. And everybody else has an obligation to say, what are we doing here? Athletic commissions who are stuck at the current, they can't just change the rules overnight, and I understand that. But they're at the point now where they're testing for something with completely unscientific means, issuing huge penalties, and nothing to do with fighter safety. They're becoming vice cops. This is just as relevant, if for fighter safety and health, this is just as relevant as asking for the commission asking to see Pat Healy's tax returns or to see if he's paid any parking tickets. It's no different. It has literally nothing to do with fighter safety and nothing to do with health. Nothing. It is a charade. And I understand that the UFC, as everyone's noted, listen, they've been more proactive about going to commissions to get rid of these kinds of crazy things, so God bless them. And they've got this compartmentalized identity, and I get that they don't want to be a sports league who is leading the charge on being soft on marijuana. I get it. Okay, fine. You got to do something. But we had Pat Healy on our Sirius radio show the Monday after he won, and we asked him, what are you going to do with that money? And it breaks my heart. I can almost cry. He was saying how many bills he had and how he was going to, he needed this money so bad. And to take that away from him is just unconscionable.
It's one of the true feel-good stories of 2013. This guy who bounced around all over the place, fought everywhere, fought some tough guys, fought once in the UFC back in 2006, lost that fight, finally gets another chance because of the Strikeforce merger, and has this amazing performance against a tough, gritty veteran like Jim Miller in his home state, gets these two bonuses, and then loses it because of this. We're giving him credit. We're saying you came out. Who knows if New Jersey would have even announced this, right? He did it all on his own. But should we just, he did mess up. At the end of the day, he did mess up. Is there any part of you that says, okay, you messed up, you have to pay the consequences, or do you not feel like he should have paid a cent of that bonus back?
I'm okay with some sort of fine. It is a rule, it's a written rule, and he broke the rules. As Luke said, these are things that can't be changed overnight. Should they be changed? Yes, soon. Even WADA is talking about this. Even WADA, who sets the tone worldwide for all these drug violations, they are talking about changing the marijuana thresholds and this and that. Marijuana was actually not outlawed by WADA till 1998.
And WADA is the World Anti-Doping
Till 1998. Did marijuana just become a problem in 1998? No. In 1998 it was changed, and even they at the time said when they outlawed it, it's not necessarily that it's a performance enhancer, it's that it goes against the spirit of the sport. The spirit of the sport. That is such a wide-reaching, subjective rationale. Exactly. You could say that about so many things. How is that fair to an athlete? We're there to determine who is the best in the field of play, the field of battle, whatever it may be. It's just not fair. And I think even if you ask Jim Miller, who lost that fight, if he thinks that Pat Healy deserved those awards, those bonuses, I'm sure he would say yes. I'm sure he would think that his marijuana use, whether it was a month beforehand or whatever, as Pat Healy said, had no bearing on who won or lost that fight. And to me, that's what it comes down to.
Chuck, you mentioned Jeff Wagenheim's piece for Sports Illustrated, and he brought up Vitor Belfort, who of course is fighting this weekend against Luke Rockhold, UFC on FX8 in Brazil. And of course, a big topic when you talk about Vitor Belfort these days is his TRT use. Is that unfair though? Because it seems like every time something happens with someone else, even when it deals with marijuana, everyone brings up Vitor Belfort. Look at Vitor. How is he allowed to do this? And Pat Healy's getting penalized. Is it unfair to loop him in all this? And why does Vitor get more criticism than anyone else using TRT these days? Chael Sonnen, Dan Henderson, Boris Griffin, Frank Mir, a lot of guys are on it. Why does it seem like Vitor gets more heat than the rest?
I think part of it is because Pat Healy's, this thing just came out and we got Vitor Belfort. You have this automatic gauge right there, these two guys doing two different things. One that could possibly affect the outcome of a fight and the other that has no bearing on the fight. So Pat Healy's thing is a little bit more innocuous, I would say, than what's going on with Vitor Belfort. I think one of the reasons he might get a little more is he's just one of the guys who came out last with it. I mean, with the guy like Dan Henderson, he was one of the first. We didn't know statistically, like he might be a guy who actually really needed it. He was up in his late 30s at the time. A lot of people might have thought he might have actually fallen into that category of somebody who actually needed it. It was the subsequent guys who came that all of a sudden needed it as well. It became, all of a sudden, everybody knew this was a loophole. Everybody knew what was going on with it. Vitor Belfort just happens to be one of the last guys. He didn't fully disclose that information until after his fight with Michael Bisping. And it does affect what happens in the cage. Michael Bisping's been knocked out by two guys, and both of them were TRT users. So does that give you more power? Of course it does. So you could directly link it to what's going on with Vitor Belfort, and that's probably part of what the hatred is.
And let us not forget, Vitor Belfort tested positive for elevated levels of testosterone back in 2006, so maybe that's why. But still, it doesn't seem like it's fair to link the two.
It's got to play a role. I mean, if you've popped for steroids before and now you need this, people are going to say, well, wait a second, that doesn't seem right. I think it's that. I think also, Dan Henderson has never had an issue with it. Like, he just flies under the radar because there's never a commission report about it. We never hear about it. He never, like Nate Marquardt was on your show saying he had marital problems, and he had all these deep, profound needs for it. Dan Henderson just goes to work and fights, and then you never hear about it again. So I think in that way he kind of camouflages it. Also though, listen, I think Vitor Belfort is beloved by many people, and I think he rubs people the wrong way. Some people just rub people the wrong way. It's an experience I'm personally familiar with. But here's the issue, with Pat Healy, he is being penalized for something that isn't legal, but many people feel should be. Vitor Belfort is kind of outspoken about his religiosity and his piety, and I think people are looking at him like you're being an opportunist about something that technically is legal and should not be, particularly given your past as a steroid user. Now, how long he used steroids, I don't know, but I think that's what's happening here. It's a contradiction of identity and spoken word, and also this background as somebody who should have done better.
Just the other day, I spoke to Vitor Belfort, and I asked him, do you get asked about this in every interview you do? And he said yes. And I said, are you kind of upset about the fact that it came out? Because now you have to answer all these questions. And he said, no, I think that everyone who's on it should be out in the public. But that doesn't correspond with how he treated this news when it was first rumored that he was on TRT. I think it was Brett Okamoto from ESPN who initially asked Vitor, there's rumors about this, are you on it? And he sort of danced around the topic and never answered it.
That's right.
Never gave a yes, never gave a no. Now he's saying everyone that's on it should freely talk about it and it's no problem. I think that's part of the problem when people look at the way he personally handled it. If it's not an issue, why wouldn't you talk about it? If you're not doing anything wrong, he says, listen, it's illegal. Even though Dana White's against it, he said, well, I understand, everyone has their opinion, but it's legal, I'm not doing anything wrong. Well, why wouldn't you talk about it before?
They are testing him more now, part of their new policy of giving the guys who are on TRT, like Chael, like Vitor, extra testing before the fights to make sure they're not abusing it. Final thing on this, and then we'll move on, Chuck. Did the UFC drop the ball with Pat Healy? Was it unfair what they did to him?
I think so. I mean, just the fact that it wasn't the commission that's going to give him, that sock him for $145,000. It's the UFC. The UFC has the right to say, you know what, we don't really agree with that. That was a bad thing. Maybe they take a portion of that. But they shouldn't take the whole thing, and especially not cave into pressures from guys who thought they deserved it in that spot and jump in those situations. And in my mind, that's the big issue here with a guy who came over and slogged it out for so long, and that last year of Strikeforce was getting ready to set the fight for the belt, never came around for him. All those things, and like Luke said, it really needed that money, and just to pull it out for something that was inconsequential doesn't make sense.
The only thing I'd say here is if anybody thinks that this penalty, like the heaviness of it, is going to stop anybody from using marijuana in the future, you're a fool. This comes on the heels of Chavez getting $1 million taken from him by a different commission. But you can see that in the world of combat sports, people will take your money away from marijuana. It will not stop them. It will not. They will continue to use it because people will take risks and they'll be foolish and young, and that's why we have to stop penalizing these guys as if they have made the world's biggest crime.
And final thing on this, can I just say kudos to Brian Caraway for getting the bonus, but not kudos for the way you went out and got the bonus. A little class would be nice. You don't have to go out on Twitter.
And it's hilarious that after UFC 159, he was the guy in there that was bumping up the new standard of $50,000 bonuses to $65,000, even though he wasn't one of the recipients. So everybody was thanking him. Now he actually pocketed an extra $15,000 on top of the...
To go out and campaign, though, publicly, it's just... While a guy that you know just was penalized, kicking him while he's down, I just think there's a better way of going about it. Call up Dana White and make your case. But, good for him. He got his $65K, and now he's a lot happier, and apparently he's an anti-marijuana protester.
Yeah, a very rational position, scientifically validated.
Guys, other big news of the week, Mark Hunt. He is having some visa troubles, and he's supposed to fight Junior Dos Santos in a matter of days at UFC 160 in Las Vegas, Nevada. This, to me, feels like the real main event of UFC 160, JDS versus Hunt, because we saw Kane versus Bigfoot already, and a lot of us think it will go the same way. Mike, let's start with you. How big of a blow would it be to that card if Mark Hunt can't get into the country?
Well, it's obviously not a worst case scenario, but it's close. Mark Hunt's gained a lot of momentum. You know, this is a guy, talk about Cinderella stories. I mean, this guy, the UFC did not want him. When they bought Pride, they acquired his contract. They tried to pay him to go away. And he said, no, I want to earn that money. I want to earn that money. I don't want to just be handed a check. I want to earn that money, which is super commendable. And he took that opportunity, made the most of it. Here he is on this winning streak, and now he's got the biggest opportunity that he's had in his career to fight a former champion. And really, I mean, if he beats Junior Dos Santos, let's face it, he should be the #1 contender. He should fight for the belt. If he beats the former champion, if he's not able to go, I think it's a huge loss for the UFC, because the heavyweight should be the UFC's glamour division. Is it always? No, not necessarily, but I think he's got such an interesting backstory and history and
Cinderella man.
Yeah,
exactly.
He was 5 and 6 coming over.
Is he 37 or 38 years old? I mean, the fact that he's doing this at this point in his career, no TRT that we're aware of, just good old-fashioned hard work. It would just be a shame, and I feel bad for him. I also feel bad for Roy Nelson being put in a position where potentially, he's being asked to fill in on short notice.
Not to mention JDS.
Of course, JDS. He doesn't know what's going on.
But Chuck, I reported on UFC Tonight this week that Roy Nelson has been sort of targeted as a potential replacement. On Friday, when this airs, he will be a part of the Nevada State Athletic Commission agenda to get a license to fight at UFC 160, but there's no deal there. They're still hoping Mark Hunt gets the fight. Is this an adequate replacement? We saw this fight already. JDS beat him down. He didn't finish him. He still beat him down. Is this an adequate replacement?
Given the circumstances, he's in Nevada. He's a guy who's on a streak of his own. I would say that that's probably the best thing they could do, is maybe throw Roy Nelson in there, but it's not the fairest thing they could do to either party, like you mentioned, to JDS or Roy Nelson, to put them in a position where, they may ruin their standing with something that was altered last minute. But I would say he's probably, if they're trying to salvage that fight, he's probably the only one who makes complete sense in that role. I just wanted to say there's something strange in there about the May fights of these heavyweights, because last year we went through the same stuff. Alistair Overeem has been scheduled to be on both of these cards, didn't end up being on either. Mark Hunt was scheduled to be on the last one against Stefan Struve, did not fight. Now we're talking about Mark Hunt again. I don't know what the deal is with these like early summer, late spring cards, but for whatever reason, these heavyweights just can't get it all done.
Another thing to consider is JDS here. I know the focus is on Hunt because he's the one who can't make it, and he's got this surge that's happening behind him, and that's all pretty cool. But JDS, he needs a rebound fight. People forget about this. He got worked by Cain Velasquez. That can change a guy. That was a it's one thing to get knocked out, It's another thing to get a sustained beating over 25 minutes. These fighters are some of the toughest guys. I don't mean just physically, but mentally. The ability to look at yourself and say, I can do better. That was not a defining experience in my life. I can prove that I am not the weaker person here. That is not automatic. That is, you have to get back in there and prove it to your superiors, to your boss, and you have to prove it to yourself. And he needs that fight. Now, whether Hunt's that rebound guy is an open question. I'm not saying it's automatic he's going to walk over Hunt. I'm just saying, if you're JDS, you're equally upset because you're looking for this opportunity to get back in there and say no delays, prove it to yourself, get back on the horse, and become another viable contender. And it would be a shame for him to lose out on that option as well.
Mike, it feels like just recently we were talking about how deep the UFC heavyweight division had become, and in the Arlovsky, Sylvia Dark days, it was pretty shallow. Now it feels like it's kind of shallow all over again. But you have Josh Barnett sitting on the sidelines, this free agent. There aren't a lot of big free agents out there in MMA these days. A guy with a pretty impressive resume. Exactly. He's sitting there, and it feels to me, he was on the MMA Hour this week, it feels to me like he has changed a lot. He is no longer the lone wolf. He is no longer the guy who doesn't really care. I'll go to Japan, I'll do this. It feels like he really wants to be in the UFC. Like he's almost campaigning. Like he's almost asking, in a way begging to get that shot to finish his career on that high note. Obviously, he's not going to fill in for Mark Hunt if Mark can't fight, but he would be a huge addition to the UFC. It seems like a no-brainer, right?
Absolutely. I think, to me, the most interesting thing about the way this has played out with Josh Barnett over the last couple months of him being a free agent, it's been interesting to me that he's sort of played it out in the public. And by that, I mean, when he first sort of turned down the UFC's offer, I don't know if it was maybe February, him and his management, I guess, they gave you the news and ran an MMA Fighting. You don't really hear stories about guys turning down contracts that often. It's usually something that's kept in private. And I think, and now he came on your show again this week and he talked about UFC being the place where he can really cement his legacy and things like that. This being the place where he wants to sort of close out his career. The fact that he's done this in public, I think, is no accident. I think he's trying to kind of, it's hard to have leverage as a free agent in MMA these days. There's just not a lot of options for you. Could Josh Barnett fight in Bellator? Of course he could, but does he want to go through fighting the tournament style? Probably not. UFC does make more sense for him. They have a deeper heavyweight class. And to me, I think that he's trying to gain leverage by galvanizing the public behind him. He's talking about this in public. He wants there to be like a groundswell behind him to tell the UFC, bring Josh Barnett in. These are matches we want to see. And will it prove to be fruitful? It seemed like as he said,
feels like it's working, right?
There's only one thing between them apparently.
He comes with baggage, it's obvious, but people do want to see him fight. Like you were mentioning, there's a relative dearth of heavyweights in the division. I think the flyweights have maybe 13 guys on the roster in UFC right now. Heavyweight only has 24. If you look at some of the other divisions, they have 70, 75 guys. There's just not a lot of guys up there challenging. And Barnett, being who he is, he's won 9 of 10. The guys he's beat, maybe you put a little asterisk there. But at the same time, he's won 9 of 10. He has some history with some of the guys who are on that roster, Big Nog, and some guys like that. There's some good fights for him. It just makes sense. I think there's a little bit of excitement. Plus, he sells the fight. His interviews. I remember the one with you where he's gonna kill people and leave the trail of dead and all this. I mean, that's fun it's fun to hear guys who just kind of these larger-than-life kind of comic book characters, and he's in a division that probably could use something like that. So it'd be interesting to see, but I'm hoping he comes back to the UFC.
Like, he does sell a fight, but what's cool, like, if you thought about how many free agents could UFC sign today who could headline a FX or Fox card? How about a Fox card? It would depend on the fight, but, he certainly could be a co-main event in a pay-per-view. He could be a main event on an FX show. Like, a lot of guys can't do that. He can do that. That's the first thing I'd say. The other thing about, like, Josh Barnett is I think he's in a really comfortable space. He lost to Daniel Cormier. I don't think he can beat the very best guys out there, but he can still beat a lot of guys. And what's cool about Josh Barnett, if you want to knuckle up, he is all too happy. If you want to have a grappling exchange, he is all too happy. I really think he'd be an ultra exciting addition to the division, not just for those reasons, but because there's no pressure like, is there title shot implications? Who cares? Let this guy get out there and entertain you. Win or lose, he will. And because he's competitive, he can fight against guys that people care about. So to me, it's, I hope they can work that out because I just don't see the downside here.
And you look at guys like Roy Nelson, Frank Mir, names like that. He presents such an interesting matchup for them, right?
He's got an old school style that's adapted for modern realities, like that catch as catch can stuff. Plus, you go back and watch his old wars with Pedro Hizzo in the UFC. Now, he came up on the wrong end of those a couple more than one time, but certainly with Crow Cop too. But you know, he has these amazing, well-rounded skills. He sits in the pocket, he exchanges, he never quits. He's a fighter's fighter, he's a fan's fighter. You know, there's not a lot to dislike. And he is 35, but I don't think he's aged to the point where he can't make something happen. So I really
sign
hope.
with him, do you think?
Yes. I don't know when, but yes.
I think so as
He's
well.
going to end up in the UFC. There's no question about it. To me, it's just a matter of timing. They both want the same thing. The UFC made him an offer. He's saying he wants to be there. They both want the same thing. Eventually, whatever this one difference is going to get ironed out.
Could he beat a Cain Velasquez, though? Could he beat the best of the best?
I don't think so. But I mean, it'd be like he was just mentioning, you know, a fight between him and Frank Mir. What difference does it make if it's for a title? You know, Frank Mir's not fighting for a title anytime soon either, but that's an interesting fight. People would want to see that.
He has a skill set, though, that makes him interesting in a lot of those fights.
Sure.
Like Luke said, I mean, can we say for sure that he can't beat Cain Velasquez? Cain Velasquez brings the fight to the ground. Josh Barnett's his ground style, submission style. And being a heavyweight, one punch changes things as a heavyweight.
Guys, let's talk about the left field story of the week. Nick Diaz apparently starting his own promotion called War, and it's happening rather quickly. Talks are that it's going to happen in June in his backyard, the 209 Stockton, California. Now, we don't know if he'll be fighting on the card, and quite frankly, given his UFC contract, that's probably not going to happen. But
Right.
Nick Diaz, as promoter, promoting MMA events,
thing I've ever heard
is
in my life.
this the greatest thing ever, or is this a disaster waiting to happen?
I don't know, but I'm interested to see. And I think that's what everyone else is saying. Like, is this going to be one of those War Gods things where Ken Shamrock fights, you know, some guy who's 10,000 pounds, or is it going to be like a legit, you know, show full of like top regional talent, and maybe they want to do it the right way? I guess we're going to have to wait and find out. Here's what I would say. I mean, I'll keep an open mind about it. I hope they do it the right way. You know, make sure it's on an off UFC weekend. Otherwise, they'll just get drowned out. Stuff like that. The only concern I have is that I hope that Nick Diaz has a pool of investors that are using their money. Not to say that
You don't trust Nick paying the fighter?
it's not a matter of don't trust. I just think that of all the ways to spend his money while he's still an active fighter, this is not the top priority I would have for
But
him.
he has said he's retired.
Given certain conditions. Right,
Exactly.
given certain conditions. All I'm saying is, listen, I've been lucky enough to commentate for regional shows in my area, in the Mid-Atlantic, and it was often by guys who had a little bit of money, and some of those were even on local TV, on Comcast Sportsnet and stuff. They do one or two and they're out, because the majority of them, they don't make money. It's not an indictment on Nick Diaz, it's not an indictment on anybody else. It's hard to make money in MMA. How many times has Dana White said that? And that goes from the UFC all the way down to regional shows. So that'd be my only concern is, as a guy who still has the ability to make some money, I'd hate to see him lose it on something that the reality is the market will always be tough. And if it's going to be in Stockton, it's going to be hard to make some live gate receipts there. So open mind, but I hope that there's someone else helping to defray the cost.
It does seem like a brilliant move to have Nick be the face of it, because he generates so much buzz in media, right?
It's the greatest thing ever. It's the greatest thing ever. I mean, can you? I want to cover the press conferences. I mean, if they do this, I'm flying to Stockton, and I mean, to have an event where Nick Diaz is the public face and he stands in front of a podium and answers questions.
Could you imagine? It would be
Who's
great.
going to ask the fighters a question? It's a Nick Diaz show. I mean,
Will he sell Wolf tickets?
that's a great.
Promoter.
I do agree with Luke though in terms of, you know, I hope that they have the right team behind this. That, you know, we remember. One of the many great Nick Diaz quotes was when he talked about, you know, the fact that he couldn't when I was out of Stockton because he didn't know how to buy a house because he didn't go to school for that. He didn't go to school for promoting either, as far as I know. It is a very, very difficult racket. And I know that, you know, he has a management team who helps him with his fight career, and I'm sure some of those same people will probably be involved with this. But I hope his investment is minimal, and I hope that it's just something he wants to have fun with, to just promote it on a local scene. And you know, Nick is a guy who loves what he does. He's passionate about things he does, and I hope that this is something he finds enjoyment with, because you know, who knows when we'll see him again in the octagon. I know we probably will, but for now, let him do something he has fun with.
I have no idea what to expect, but I wonder if WAR stands for Wrestling Ain't Required. Because it just seems to me like, you know, that's his big beef with the fighting. The UFC He wants to see guys who want to stand and bang. I mean, it'd be real interesting to see what he does, but more interested to me right now is what Dana White has to say about this whole thing.
Absolutely.
When somebody puts the microphone, maybe you next week, and see what Dana has to say about that.
But you know what's interesting about this is I'm worried because Nick has sometimes implied that the people around him aren't taking care of him. And I'm worried that this is a situation where someone is pushing him to the forefront here and saying, don't worry, we'll figure this out. You know, you just made $1 million fighting GSP, something like that. Invest in this. I hope that he has a say. If his name and face is attached to this, I hope that he has a say, because he has implied as recently as the post-fight press conference at UFC 158 that he wasn't being taken care of, that he was kind of left to figure things out on his own. That's a big problem. Then didn't file his taxes, and now a month later you're doing a promotion. I'm not saying he's not capable of it, but clearly someone is pushing this, and clearly it's a group idea. He's not just doing it on his own.
You don't think he was the one who said, I want to be a promoter?
I don't think that he could, that he said, I want to be a promoter, I'm doing this on my own. So he may have thought about it, but someone else is putting this in motion, right?
One hopes.
Yeah.
One hopes.
But, you know, you know the guys around him, I know the guys around him. I don't have any reason to believe that these are people who, at this juncture, are trying to financially help him take a bath.
He has implied that he has not been helped out.
Yeah, but he made management changes too, both he and his brother. You know, it's an open question about what it all means in the end, but and also we don't. I mean, yes, he's applied for the license, but we don't really know what his involvement is.
We don't.
You know, I think I don't know if he applied for the license and he's basically going to just be the face of it while someone else does operations.
Which would be brilliant.
Which would be a brilliant way to go about it. I just don't know I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea what's going on.
You have to remember too, I mean, when Nick goes through these moments in the media, when he talks about not being taken care of by his team and his handlers and stuff, it's also during the course of fight week. And as we know, Nick gets during fight week, he's just a different person, I think, than who he is in his regular life. I mean, he talks about he doesn't like fighting, right? He doesn't like the process of going through the fight, and he kind of gets himself into a certain mental space, I feel like, when he fights. And a lot of that is coming from that mindset. So this is completely different. If this is something that's fun for him, and of course, this has to be a team thing. I mean, you can't be a one-man promotion. That just doesn't make sense. Right. I'm sure he's got other people with him. So hopefully they're all handling their specific duties. And like we said, he's the face of it, maybe a small investor, and it's something he can enjoy.
Or whatever.
Well, how about this? What if Nick Diaz's War Promotions ends up on Showtime? Steven Espinoza, the boss of Showtime Sports, was on the MMA Hour this week and said that they are still very much interested in MMA. He actually put it at the top of his to-do list right now. He said to get back into MMA is a goal of theirs. They just don't know how they can get back into MMA. What's out there? Are there any options? He turned the tables on me and asked me what I thought. I brought up Invicta, which I still don't think can happen. I don't think Invicta can happen because of their relationship with the UFC. I just feel like the UFC doesn't want or wouldn't want Invicta to get into bed with Showtime. So if not Invicta, is there anything out there for Showtime?
I don't know. And no one really has a good answer for that. I mean, there's obviously overseas promotions that...
Are there any good ones, though?
There's some decent ones. You know,
for Showtime. The home of Floyd Mayweather now.
There's nothing hand in glove. Right. I think that's the problem. You don't see any real natural fits. And that's, it's a big issue. But the thing that was encouraging to me about the interview that you did with him was, if they didn't have interest in it, he would probably say something like, listen, at this time, we keep the doors open, but we don't have any immediate plans. He did not say that. He unequivocally said this was something that they want to do. The logistics make that a complicated task. Do you go to Road FC in Korea, or do you bring that here? Who's even available? Do you try and cut a deal with Bellator because of the Viacom umbrella? What even happens there? I don't know what they're going to do. Or do you get a deal with multiple promoters and have a one-off here and a one-off there? I mean, there's a variety of combinations. I guess we're going to leave it up to the very capable hands of Steven Espinoza, but the only thing I just want to reiterate with that, I was just really encouraged by was, I did not get any sense that they had any plans to close the door. They did good ratings with it. They can do it, especially with who's out there, at low cost. And you know what? Viacom is not known for sports that goes all the way from Spike to MTV to Showtime, but they're leading the way in combat sports. They've gotten good at that, and you saw them flex their muscles on the Mayweather programming. This is a chance to sort of bring some of those best practices back to MMA. I hope they find a way.
Mike, do you disagree with me? Do you think Invicta is a viable option for them?
Well, I think that they've certainly built themselves into a credible promotion in a short amount of time, and whenever they have events, it draws quite a bit of interest. I think we've all seen that from the metrics involved on the web, and apparently Ustream said that they were the most. Their last event was like the most purchased event they'd ever done. So there's certainly interest around it. As you said though, I don't know. They do have a working relationship with Zuffa. Would that preclude them from signing with them, or do they just end that relationship with Zuffa to go with Showtime? It's a possibility. I do think that is the best fit because they have made a little niche for themselves in a short amount of time. There's no other player out there that's done that. I mean, World Series of Fighting has a home. Bellator has a home. They're not going anywhere. So no one else has made any sort of national dent as Invicta has.
Not to mention the process of discovery we were talking about last week, just kind of with the women right now and everything they've got going on. It makes sense if they were able to get Invicta. I think that comes with its own intrigue, everything that comes with that. But at the same time, I agree with you. That's a big hurdle for Espinoza and Showtime to get over. I know that he was mentioning, I think, on your show that no hard feelings from their end. Maybe that's to soften them up a little bit and see if they could get something done that way. But I see it as too much of a hurdle. I don't think that they'll have MMA in 2013.
There is one FC out there. I mean, it's in Singapore. I don't know if that would even work because of the Friday at 7. I've gotten up for it, Friday at 7 a.m. on East Coast time. I don't know if that works out for it. But to the extent that they could sign some sort of cooperative deal to get some of their fighters, they do have a decent stable of guys you could put a 4-fight card on Showtime for. So it's not crazy. They're just going to have to be creative.
And you mentioned hand in glove. I mean, Showtime, for all intents and purposes, I mean, they were the home of women's MMA in North America, or at least they gave birth to it, right? With that Carano-Julie Kedzie fight in 2007. They were really the place that you went to for women's MMA with Elite XC first and then Strikeforce. And yes, they kind of went in and out, and depending on who was the star, but Invicta does seem like the most logical fit, right? I mean, they don't have a TV partner. As Mike said, they're hot as far as interest, and they do a good job of building talent, I'd say.
They do, and again, I think the most relevant part about Showtime's involvement with Strikeforce was number 2, but it didn't cost a ton to put that on. Invicta has to be, relative to even Strikeforce, dirt cheap, especially with the venues that they go to.
They'd have to graduate from those venues.
Yeah, you know what, and this is the thing is we're all big fans of women's MMA here, and I think it's all very credible. Invicta is I want to be clear about this, Invicta is a very credible organization, but I wonder if Showtime would think, A, it's either gimmicky to have it on their platform, they may not, or B, they love Invicta, but God, they just want some heavyweight fights. They just want some heavyweight fights. And they don't get that option with Invicta, even if they may get many other benefits that come along with having a very credible organization.
So Chuck said, you don't think Showtime airs MMA in 2013?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? 2014?
Possibly. I mean,
but 2013 is out. What do you
Can we
think?
bring Pro Elite back?
Hey, there's still the kind. No, I guess they're not.
Minowa Man's still available out there.
Yeah, I think the most likely scenario would be some sort of deal where they cobble together a couple promotions and run, co-promotion.
Like a
match.
boxing type of model? If M1 has a big fight in Russia, they'll go there. If 1FC has a big fight, can they even do that? Does that work in MMA?
I don't know.
I feel like that's kind of what Access TV does, right?
Yeah, but they're good at it.
I don't see any other entry into the MMA space.
What do you mean by that?
Who?
Who's good at it? Showtime or Access?
Well, Showtime's good at what they do. Access is good at what they do. I don't like Legacy so much. I mean, it's a good organization, but it's not my favorite. My favorite's RFA. But the thing is, when you turn on to Access on Friday night, there's a lot of guys you never heard of. It's a lot of fights you don't care, and it's pretty clearly a step down from UFC, even to some extent Bellator. But that's not their angle. Their angle is getting guys very, very early, and they've got good matchmakers. And the guys at RFA, man, they're super talented. They have a genius for finding the top blue chip guys and put them in fights that matter and that make sense for their careers. Can that be replicated? I think it can. Like, does RFA have a stranglehold on all the best guys coming out of ATT and AKA and Jackson's? I don't think that they do.
But the thing about RFA is they have come out, and I think it's to their credit, and said, we are a minor league promotion. Yeah. But they get guys like Sergio Pettis, Bubba Jenkins. Sure. And they'll get guys like a Jeff Curran who's trying to build himself up. I love that. But does Showtime want to be involved in that?
They want to be a feeder.
Yeah, they don't want that.
They may not want that. In the end, it's probably not preferable, but do they want that, or do they want some great, cheap content that delivers awesome ratings?
Right.
There's really nothing that wouldn't be considered that's out there and available, right? There's no other.
Yeah, who are they going to pick up that they can fraudulently market as
Or maybe
rival?
they create that, with all the cuts coming in the UFC, you get a few of those guys and you create your own league.
He did say he didn't want to do it unless it was something quality. He didn't want to just run MMA just to run MMA. He did want to, he wanted to put together something viable. So I can't foresee that being an option where he's just going to cobble together off of all the losers that kind of trickle off of the UFC's roster.
So Mike, in a word, yes or no, 2013 MMA? How about you, Mike?
No.
Luke? No?
Not 2013.
Wow. A lot of negativity here.
It's not just realistic,
No,
man.
I know. I agree, by the way.
Halfway through the year already.
It's true. We are halfway through the year, and we are out of this show. We're done. Thank you so much for joining us. Great stuff, guys. A lot to cover this week, and I think we did so in a good amount of time. We covered everything very nicely. So great stuff there, and we want to hear from you now. Let us know in the comment section below, and be nice to Luke.
Oh, I don't care.
He's a nice guy.
My fan club meets in the YouTube section. Join them.
We want to hear from you guys, though. What do you think of what we talked about? What do you want us to talk about in the future? Great to be back 2 weeks in a row here on the MMA Beat. Love doing the show, and we'd love to hear from you as well. For Luke, Mike, Chuck, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching another edition of the MMA Beat.